Hi, my name's Karen Kolbe, and I'm coming to you today as Mother Goose. I'm going to be reading a fable, and a fable is a story that isn't true. You have to use your imagination, and there's a lesson usually that you can learn from a fable. And it's in my big book of fairy tales and rhymes and bedtime stories. The fable I'm going to read today is called Puss in Boots. Once upon a time, there was a miller who had 3 sons. The miller loved his sons very much, but he was not a rich man. When he died, he left his mill to the eldest son and his donkey to the middle son. All he could leave the youngest son was the cat that caught the mice at the mill. Boys and girls, a miller is somebody who runs a mill, and a mill is used to grind wheat into flour. "You are a fine mouser, Puss," said the youngest son, "but I don't know how that's going to help me make a living." "Don't worry, master," said the cat. "Just give me a pair of your old boots and a bag, and you'll find that we get along very well." The miller's son was astonished, but he did as Puss asked. The clever cat put some lettuce leaves in a bag and left it in a field. When a little rabbit came out and nibbled at the leaves, Puss jumped out from his hiding place and caught the rabbit in the bag. Then he set off for the king's palace. The servants were amazed to see a cat wearing boots, so they led him to the king. "Your Majesty," said Puss, bowing low, "I am your loyal servant, and I hope that you will accept this present of a nice, plump rabbit." The king was very amused by the cat's fine ways. "Who is your master, Puss?" he asked. "My master is the Marquis of Carabas," said the cat grandly. After that, the cat often visited the king. One day he learned that the king was going to take a trip beside the river with his daughter, the princess. "Master," said Puss, "today you must go for a swim in the river and pretend that you have a new name. From now on, you are the Marquis of Carabas." Later that day, the king and his daughter were riding along the riverbank in his carriage when they saw Puss running up and down in distress. "Oh, your Majesty," cried Puss, "there's a terrible thing has happened. My master, the Marquis of Carabas, was swimming in the river, and some thieves stole his clothes." In fact, Puss had hidden them in the bushes. In no time at all, the king had sent for a fine suit of clothes to be brought to the young man. When he was dressed, he was invited to ride in the royal carriage and be introduced to the princess. Meanwhile, Puss was running along the road ahead. When he saw some haymakers in the field, he said fiercely, "When the king comes by, if you don't say that these fields belong to the Marquis of Carabas, you'll be minced into little bits and eaten." The workmen were so frightened that they did just as Puss asked. In fact, every field that the king passed seemed to belong to the Marquis. "I congratulate you on your fine lands, my lord," said the king. The miller's son didn't know what to say, so instead he smiled at the princess. While this was happening, Puss had reached a huge castle. Bravely, he walked right up to the ogre that owned it. "I heard you can do magic, your giantness," said Puss. "I should so like to see some." The ogre gave a great roar of laughter and turned himself into a lion. Puss was very frightened, but he pretended not to be. "That's quite good," he said, "but I expect it would be more difficult for a great fellow like you to turn him into something small, like turning yourself into a mouse." The ogre became a mouse in a second, but in less than a second, Puss had pounced. The ogre made a very tasty snack indeed. When the king arrived at the castle, everything was ready. "Welcome to my master's home, your Majesty," said Puss. Of course, the king was very impressed, and the princess was even more impressed. Before long, she and the miller's son were married and lived happily ever after in the castle. And Puss? Well, the castle cellars turned out to be absolutely full of mice. So Puss lived happily ever after as well. Here are some pictures. Here is the mean ogre in front of the castle, the big castle. And here he has turned into a lion. Puss is a little bit afraid. But then he asked him to turn into a mouse. And do you remember what happened, boys and girls? He ate the mouse. Down here are the prince and the princess. And here's Puss on a nice, soft, fluffy pillow. And here are his boots. And if you look really closely, you can see a tiny little mouse in there. Did you like that story, boys and girls? I like that story. I like to use my imagination.